My name is Gordon Goody, and well, what can I say about myself? Nice guy, pleasant, personality.
But why are we talking to you? Why are you so...
Well, you're talking to me because of something I'd done 50 years ago.
In August 1963, he was part of the gang that stole £2.6 million from the Glasgow to London mail train.
I was in Kensington Gardens with Buster, and we had a meet with the Irishman. He knew, had information regarding money travelling on a travelling post office. It came from Glasgow. And I asked him what kind of dough we're talking about. He said, well, it could be up to £5 million. When someone mentions £5 million to you, I've never had that offer before. The Irishman, when I found out who he really was, then he didn't want anybody else to know. So I said, all right, we'll just keep it between Buster and I. And we kept it between Buster and I for all these years, up until I met you. I wasn't unaware of the consequences here, you know, and going up against the Queen and stealing the Royal Mail. I mean, in the old days, you used to top them straight away. We were modern Dick Turpin sort of thing.
I was the one that got the message on the police radio when it said, you're not going to believe this.
They just stole a fucking train. We cracked it, yeah, that was it, we cracked it. I had commitments, I had to pay the Irishman money. Well, I admired the guy because everything he said, it was right. When I gave him the money, he does what he likes with his money.
He just disappeared with it?
Yeah, that's it.
One of the great train robbers has given us some information that will help us track down somebody who's disappeared. One of the supposed masterminds of the train robbery. This is a guy who was never caught. He disappeared 50 years ago with his £200,000, which was the equivalent of about $2.5 million, and nobody's found him. What we do know is he was in his possibly early 40s. He was quite well dressed. He wore glasses. And the other thing that Gordon's told us, which is something that he's never told anybody before, is the guy's name. Do you think you can find him?
Potentially, provided the information you've got is correct. It's been a while since this guy met the fella, but potentially, yes.
No, I don't consider myself a gangster now. I'm just an ordinary thief.
That's life. That's what people say. You're riding high in April, shot down in May. But I know I'm gonna change their tune.
If you're going to be a thief, you've got to be a good thief if you can, you know. But I've never looked for fame as a criminal, you know. I've never wanted to be known as a good criminal, or there's never something that I wanted to walk in somewhere and someone said, oh, he's a good thief, he's this, or even give that, even project that. I knew I'd rather take a step back and stand in the background, really, not to be known, because of quite a lot of reasons. One of them being my size, my height and my colouring and that. And I stand out in a crowd. And when there's an identification parade, you know, I'd be picked out just like that.
I pick myself up and get back in the race.
I've often given a thought to myself, you know, what made you go down this road? And there's no answer for it, you know, no answer.
I was born in London, but I moved to Ireland when I was only 2 days old.
My schooling was very bad, but my life in the country was very, very good. And I suppose you can say I am a country boy at heart. And then that was when that's when I first got involved in something criminal, but I didn't see it as anything seriously criminal. With myself and another guy, Arthur Conley his name was. And we used to go out and just nick a chicken here and there. Anyway, I suppose you could say that was my first entrance into crime.
I returned to London, where my parents lived here, 6 Commondale, Putney. Now, it wasn't a great time to be living in London, to be honest. The Blitz was over, but there were still regular bombing raids all over the East End and in the docks. By this time, I decided I'd had enough of education, but my dad insisted I had a career.
I haven't had any sort of training as anything, you know. My father wanted me to be a plumber. I think I wanted to be maybe a burglar. And it contrary to what my father wanted, always. We did have problems, yeah. And it was only a sort of a family thing, really, but it drew blood. It was a serious problem we had, my father and I. And I left home. Well, my mother used to look after me. She would meet me in cinemas and different parks and things like that, and she'd bring me food and she'd give me money and that sort of thing, as mothers do. And on this day we had a meet on Putney Bridge, and I'm sitting talking to her. And all of a sudden my father pulled up. My mother must have told him or something. She's trying to have a reconciliation, and I thought, oh, here we go again, we're going to have another row here. Anyway, so he said, no, sit down, son. He said, look, I want you to come home. You know, so me being full of it, I said, nah, I don't want to fucking come home. And I really wanted to come home, you know. But I had to put a brave face on it. He said, come home, he says, and we'll never talk about it again. And it brings tears to my eyes to watch them. And this is what happened, you know. We had the greatest relationship possible between him and I, you know. And, you know, the whole thing should never happen. Anyway, things do happen.
I did try a few straight jobs. I even joined the Merchant Navy. Now, the best thing about the Navy was that they gave you a seaman's book, which gave you free passage anywhere in the world, no questions asked. I thought this might come in handy later on. It was about that time I decided I was destined for a life of crime.
I spent maybe 4 years in Soho. I was just bumming around the West End, stealing everything and anything that wasn't nailed down, if you like, you know.
You've got to remember the climate of the times. Rationing had been in full force, so the black market was thriving. Butchers, greengrocers, bakers, pub landlords, restaurant owners, no one could survive without dealing in the black market. And all transactions were based on cash. Wages were paid in cash too. That's just how things were back then. Those were the days.
One piece of work mightn't come along for a month or something like that. It's not a thing that you're working every day in our business, you know. It might be you're working today and you might work for 6 weeks again, or, you know, it wasn't a sort of a regular week's work.
Jaguar's index number, Bravo, Yankee, Romeo, 50.
Our seemingly impossible cold case, where you up to?
Well, if we take the facts, the key facts as we know them, we've got a name, which we've tried to establish how many individuals born between a relevant time period in Northern Ireland, England, Wales and Scotland, and there's over 200 individuals that fit the bill. The next stage is to eliminate these individuals from our inquiry. At the moment, the most likely one, the second individual born in 1917, appears to have sort of vanished off the face of the earth, which could be seen as an encouraging thing, because that is what we would expect someone with pocketfuls of money to do.
And what about the one born in 1927? Because that age may be about right.
Unfortunately, at the moment, there's no record of where that person went. What we are going to be doing is checking death records to see if there's any kind of death certificate for any of these people. You're actually hunting through years and years and years and years of records.
These trains have made thousands and thousands of journeys without the slightest mishap, without the slightest loss of money over the last 120 years. This is the first time it's happened.
Are you blaming British Railways?
No, I'm not saying that at the moment.
Are you now more convinced than you were yesterday that this may be an inside job?
Well, when I was asked the question yesterday, I said I did not rule out the possibility of it being an inside job. I don't rule that out now.
Most of the young criminals of that day, they was all using keys, you know? The skeleton key, the idea of what the films give out. You know, it's a completely different story. I mean, there are people in the business, I don't suppose now, because the locks have all changed. But at that time, there was some proficient locksmiths, or whatever you like to call them. Work is what you do best, you know. It could be robbing a bank car, an armoured car, or anything. Breaking into some place. If you've got the information, you know what's there, then you go for it. And that's work. That's what you call work. I'd robbed a store. There's a firm called Cramps in Kings Road, Hammersmith. And we got into there, me and another face who was a layabout around the West End at that time. His name was Jimmy the Yank, I think they called him, you know. At that time, I was playing around. I'd met a young girl, and she was on the run from her foster parents. Anyway, the police fancied me. And one day, lying in bed with her, the door came in, and 3 or 4 policemen came in, out of bed. Get out of bed, and she was in bed, and we're both stalkers. And they were more interested in the young bird. She wasn't a bad sort, as it happens. Anyway, they took us from there, they took us down to Hammersmith Nick.
When I went into Hammersmith Nick, they confiscated my seaman's book, and I was very keen to get it back, as you can quite imagine. And as I said, it allowed me to travel anywhere I wanted in the world without a passport, a very valuable object in my line of work. Now, I had this acquaintance, and he said he knew this crooked cozzer who, for 800 quid, would snaffle back my seaman's book from Hammersmith Nick. I
had a meet with him in Bow Road, right next to where Ronnie and Reggie had the snooker hall. It was the first time I ever met Ronnie Cray. And I was in there, and I had Briggs, that's the guy's name, Briggs, with me. As I was walking out the door, Ronnie Cray said to me, and I don't know why he said it to this day, and I mean, I've known Ronnie over the years in the Nick afterwards, you know, and we spoke about this, and he said, I had to mark your card. And as I was going out the door, he said, be careful the guy you're with, he's a wrong one. Like that. And I got outside, and I thought to myself, well, why is he telling me this, you know? Anyway, I found out the hard way. The guy said, yeah, I can get your seaman's book, and he wanted 800 quid.
I gave my acquaintance the money, told him to give it to the copper if he could guarantee he'd get my book back. Following day, went round to my acquaintance's house, but I soon found out he'd done the dirty on me. I knocked on the door, no answer. Got back in the car and then bang, there they were. One police car in front, one behind, blocking me in.
The guy had grasped me up, obviously. Anyway, so I took off running. And I ran for a while, and a lorry was just pulling away from the side of the road. And I jumped onto the running board, and I said, drive on, mate, like that. And I put my hand in my pocket and showed him the money. The guy nearly collapsed. And it frightened him, and he stopped. And I've got a cozzer chasing me. And I run into a cul-de-sac. And as I'm in the cul-de-sac, I can't go anywhere. And the cozzer's come into me, so I run towards him, hoping to get past him. And he's thrown a right hander at me and put me down. And as I went down, my knee landed on one of these, fucking, it was painful, like a little piece of metal sticking up like that, and I was fucked.
They got me. That was it. They got me. I still remember the first time I went into prison. Wormwood Scrubs.
I must have been about 17 at the time when I punched the guy out and stole his wallet. It was just that it was easy to nick money off of. That's really the story, you know. Anyway, I got nicked for it, and I was sentenced to 21 months. 21 months and 12 strokes of the birch.
Well, you know, thieves that commit violence, they should be flogged with the cat.
And you step down out of that bus that takes you there, and you walk into the reception, and it's a bit fearsome. It's a bit fearsome, sure it is. You've got no friends at that moment, you know, not within the prison. A lot of the screws were sort of ex-military, you know, ex-guardhouse, that sort of thing. When you get to your cell door and he opens your cell door, bang, the door's shut, and now you're on your own. It's a very lonesome time, I'd say, for after you've been inside a couple of times, it's nothing. It's just part of the routine. But for anyone for the first time, especially if they're a person who's maybe a bit timid, maybe, you know, it's quite a shock for them. When that door bangs and you think, fuck me, what's going to happen now, you know?
But what of the victims? How little we hear about them. Is it any wonder that people are asking, oughtn't bandits to get the cat? Wouldn't that stop all this coshing?
And 12 strokes of the birch. I couldn't stand when I come off it. I remember I couldn't stand, and a doctor came over, and there was a crowd of people there. It was embarrassing, apart from being painful. It was quite embarrassing as well. And there was maybe a dozen people. The people from the Home Office standing looking. And there's the governor of the prison, deputy governor, and screws and security, and it was all in the gymnasium. When they hit you, they can't bend their arm. It fucking hurts. It hurts. You know, I think they've got to keep the hand straight and hit you like that. But they hit you as hard as they can, but without the bend, you get more force if they bend their arm and hit you. The first one hits you, think about it, it'll make all black man's pinches. You know, if you hit someone hits you like that, you're going to have black man's pinches on it and a bruise. The second one bursts them, and then there's 10 more to come. And they're beaten on raw, bloody flesh. So that's really, and that's not exaggeration for the telly. That is exactly what it does.
In all my years of experience, these thieves that have had the cat, and my word, they never come back for a second lot.
Well, obviously it didn't stop me, because I went on to be sitting here talking to you. Now, when you go in prison, you don't know anyone. But when you come out, you know everyone of any value, or any value to you and the plans you've got, you know. And I always thought, well, I'd like to be able to blow a safe. You know? And I met a guy who was in for blowing safes. And the way he explained it to me, it was quite simple. You just put set 2 explosives to blow the door off, right? The door's going to come out that way. The first thing is the escutcheon plate on the thing. You always take the escutcheon plate off the keyway, because that'll come, when that blows, that'll be like a bullet just flying around, you know? If you're sitting on top of it, there's no way the other side or the top part is going to be, you're in the safest place, sitting on top of it. The secret of blowing a safe is you must get that gelinite up against the lock that's inside, you know. And the lock inside on safes at that time was just like an ordinary lock of a front door, a mortise lock of a front door. On one particular occasion, I got two leads off the deck wire like that, and I stuck it in and I'm trying to poke it in the hole like that. And one's gone in, and I'm fiddling around with the other, and the other one's gone. Thing's gone off. It's gone off so fucking quickly. Well, the door buckled, the door come off. I was suffering from concussion. I said, Charlie, I said, I just nearly fucking killed myself tonight. I first met Buster at the Palladium, London Palladium, and I was there seeing a show, and it was Sammy Davis. I was there, and it had been about 5 minutes it started, and all of a sudden somebody came in late. And so Sammy Davis, you know, he made a joke of it. I suppose he was joking as well. He stopped the show. And people who had just come in was Buster, his wife, and two other people. Sammy Davis has sort of gone into, not a tantrum, but he's going, yeah, why would I? You missed this and you missed that. He said, I'll do it all again. That was the first time I met Buster. Yeah, Bruce had a good reputation. He was known and wanted to be known as a jewel thief.
Whatever you do the best job you can. So once I became, in my own mind's eye, that I was going to be a thief, I wanted to be, if not the best, naturally I aspired to be the best, but I wanted to be one of the best. I wanted peer group recognition, naturally.
Bruce is not a violent man. Bruce is more stealth and more the old climbing brigade. You know, what they used to call a country house gang. You know, Bruce was very much into that sort of thing. I remember the first piece of work I went on with Bruce. I remember that. And it was Bruce's work, as it happens. And it was a bookmaker. The person's walking along in front, and I'm coming in from head-on thing, straight on. And I remember I had my Spanish companion with me. It's a flexible thing. It's made of leather and rubber, you know. It's a frightener, a stinger, you know. If I give you a whack on the head, you won't like it. But if I give you a whack on the head with an iron bar, then you wouldn't like that either. That would be worse still. And all I'd done was the guy just hit him in the stomach with it, and he dropped the bag straight away. And I remember that was the first bit of work I went on with him, you know. Nobody got hurt, nice and sweet, and that was it.
We've had a look at the archives in Northern Ireland, and we have got one possible candidate, which we've narrowed down from the 132.
Is that a pedo?
Well, no.
So what time was he born, this one?
27th of December 1917.
So he'd be 96 now if he was still alive.
If he was still alive, yeah. The other possibilities, born in 1907, and the other side of the scale are born in 1929.
Right. Have you had a look through a phone book from, say, 1968 to see if there's a mate?
There's not.
There's not?
No.
Suspect number one just disappears?
Certainly from London, yeah. Or Greater London.
So we kind of hit a brick wall.
Unfortunately, where it leaves us is making stabs in the dark. Because without the cross-reference information, we're back to actually just picking names out of a hat.
We thought we could do anything. Honestly, at that time, everything we went on was sort of heavy, but in most cases, anything we went on, we succeeded. A car in Chelsea, that was Bruce's work. We knew the exact route it was going, but along the way, there were some roadworks. And so to do it as we wanted to do it, in a quiet place, we had to put it on an alternative route. There was a night watchman doing his bit there. We'd put up the turn left sign to make the lorry go where we wanted it. He must have thought, well, they shouldn't be there. And he moved the road signs and just put them on the side. As soon as he'd gone back, Bruce has now come in front of the truck and he went bosh, head on. The security guard at the side, the doors wasn't locked, I pulled the doors up like that, and he was going back in and his legs were, and I grabbed his legs like that. So he's half in and half out of the back part of it. And Charlie's climbed over me, gave the guy a clump, and that was it, we had the prize. 70 grand, I think, yes, 70 grand, yeah, 70 grand, yeah. And that was it, that was the armoured car robbery in Chelsea. I had a piece of work offered to me one day. Do I want to go on this bank? I said, no, I said, I'm going fishing. I didn't want to go and rob a bank that day.
I'm a qualified social worker, but I don't think that's why you're here. And I also trace missing people, mostly missing family members.
I'm trying to find somebody who's not been heard of for 50 years. I know his name, I know roughly kind of how old he was, I know roughly what he looked like. I know that he's had a lot of people looking for him over the last 50 years. Gordon's been very honest with us in everything he's ever said to us, but there's always the kind of outside chance that he might just be leading us somewhere. I don't know, it's something that's always been at the back of my mind. Everything else he's ever told us has been very, very accurate. But, you know, it would be good to know either way where the name he just made up.
It's a common name. There'll be in the hundreds of people, not that you could say are in their mid-40s, but I would take that with a pinch of salt, coming from a man who was 32. I think that people's perception of other people's ages, it can be very varied. So if he thinks that, for example, he's 45, I would want to search the period, let's say from 39 to 53, to be absolutely on the safe side. And so I think it's going to be about whittling down in the hundreds to get to the right person. You know, I think it's going to be a challenging case. I think it's going to be tough.
Charlie Wilson was the one that brought us the information about the Heathrow Airport job, and it was more than a little bit interesting. It involved relieving them of wage packets believed to be in the region of 400 grand, and it was easy.
Charlie and I think it was Buster maybe, we went to look at it, and we realised that the best way to have it is not to let it get in as far as the wage office. The easiest way is to intercept it when it was at the ground level. You don't have to come carrying boxes or sacks downstairs. So to have it in the reception area. So where the money was coming from was from a bank just across the way. And from inside the building in the toilets upstairs, you could look across and see the van being loaded.
Me, Buster, Charlie and Bruce were already in. We had two of London's best getaway drivers, Roy James and Mickey Ball. We acquired 2 jacks, and we needed a pair of bolt croppers to cut the chain on the gate that led to the perimeter road that would be our escape route.
And we'd already cut the chain on the gates.
Of course, we had old faithful Tommy the Cutter, and he made this link. You couldn't see it, sort of a male-female connection that pulled apart like that.
But he made a very, very good job. You couldn't see it. You couldn't see it. And it was a matter of then just pulling it apart. And we had a pair of bolt cutters in the car as well for emergencies. And when Charlie went out to open the chain, he couldn't find the bus. It was so good he couldn't find it. So eventually he had to chop it with bolt cutters.
Now, the name of the game is not to be recognised. If you're an average, normal-sized guy, you've got far less likelihood of being pulled out of a lineup than someone like myself. I mean, I've got blonde hair, blue eyes, beautiful, I'm 6'3", you know?
I was just as alive. I had some beard and moustache on and a hat.
For the Heathrow Airport job, I dyed my hair black. I fixed a false moustache, I had my Guardia Civil truncheon and a tweed hat.
We've got to wait and see the van leaving the bank. And we see it coming around, then you lose sight of it for a minute, and then next thing you know, it's downstairs.
Downstairs, the boys, dressed in their City Gents outfits, were waiting. They were watching the strongbox being transferred from the trolley into the foyer, and they followed it in behind. The rest of us descended in the lift. As they pressed the button for the lift, and the lift comes down, we're in the lift. So as the doors open, they're confronted with us, and they done what was right. One of them got a clump, or two got a clump, but they just surrendered straight away. And then it was a matter, I think Bruce and the other guy there, he carried the money out to the Jags. We grabbed the box and ran out to Mickey's Jag. We threw it in the boot and piled in the back. We could have got blocked off the second car, but Mickey swung. There's traffic coming this way and traffic going that way and lights. And Mickey swung in front of and he blocked the whole traffic off just to let us through. It was very well done as that. He was a bit of a master driver, Mickey. Yeah? And anyway, so off we go. Now, what I didn't realise was that my Donegal hat had come off during the confrontation. And it was left behind. And I didn't give it much thought at the time, but the police had it as evidence. Yeah, the identity plate, they got us to wear hats and moustaches and, I don't know, some other bits and pieces. And the security guard who, he identified me. He said that I give him a clump, which is true. We got hold of this crooked cozzer who had access to the prosecution exhibits, including my tweed hat. Now, for 200 quid, he said he'd replace my tweed hat with an identical one 3 sizes bigger. That somebody had access to the evidence room and they swapped it around. And so they said, well, try the hat on in the court. It's Lewis Hawser. And the hat, when I put the hat on, it came down to here. Their case collapsed. I was elated. Yes, Mickey, he was the driver. He got a 5 just for being a driver. And the prosecutor, his name was Michael Corkery. And as I was, it wasn't in the court, this was outside the court in one of the passageways. And he was coming towards me, and he had the chain. He's quite a nice fellow, Corkery, you know. He said, congratulations, there were no hard feelings or anything like that. And he shook my hand. And I said to him, I said, well, you're a forensic officer. He wasn't all that clever, was he? So he said, what do you mean? So I said, well, he hadn't seen this, did he? And I pulled it. It was the biggest mistake I've made in my criminal career. And I'm sure he dined out on it many, many a time. And consequently, I say that was one of the reasons that I was fitted up for the train, you know, because I did it. I suppose it wasn't intended, but I took the piss.
So these are post office archives. I think we've gone through about a full shelf. This is a sort of a summary of the investigation that the post office carried out. And this has been made, this is in the public domain now. And unfortunately, after 2 days research, we discovered that although they investigated a lot of people were followed and looked at and so on, none of them pertained to him.
So that's good. So he's never, until we find out his name, he's never been on anybody's radar?
No, he's not come onto anyone's radar. I mean, they are quite amazing. There's an amazing amount of detail in them, actually. And for example, here they're talking about somebody who joined the train in Carlisle, and it says of him, he speaks with an Irish accent, not a heavy spender, and neither drinks nor gambles.
Speaks with a Cockney accent. He's often seen in the company of Michael Raymond Little, I don't know who that is, in the public houses and working men's clubs. So they were obviously following people around, weren't they?
They were. I've just seen this actually, I hadn't noticed this before. Robert suspected of involvement because of a telephone call made on the 1st of the 4th, 1963 from Victoria Wine Company. Quite extraordinary detail. Including, in this particular man's case, his dates of service with the RAF. I mean, I think that the principle is this tip from the underworld, which was that there was somebody on the train who was involved and who has an Irish connection. And so I think pretty well everybody that they're investigating was either on the train or related to somebody that was on the train.
There's no leaders in the train gang, no leaders at all. We were just a group of, I suppose you could call us, determined thieves. Well, my role in the planning was, it was, I say, it was my business from the beginning, so you'll plan it as you plan any other robbery.
My two major areas of concern were how to stop a train and where to do it. We just didn't know how to stop a train. We soon realised we needed some help, especially considering the 70 postal workers that might be in the carriage next door. A bit of extra muscle would come in handy. We argued back and forth and came to the conclusion that we should get involved with the South London gang. Now, we did our homework and we concluded that this bridge was the perfect place to unload the train. But we could only stop the train at Sears Crossing, a couple of 100 yards down the track. Now, we knew that if we uncoupled the engine from the car with the money on it, we'd isolate the postal workers, who would have no idea there was anything going on. But the problem was, how would we drive the train from the crossing to the bridge?
We needed a driver, right? We couldn't rely on Mills, because if Mills turns around and says, fuck you, I'm not going to drive it, that's the end of the story.
What if, no matter how hard we persuaded him, he wouldn't do it?
So we need a driver standby. And Bruce had a friend, and during conversation, maybe Bruce asked him what he was doing these days. He said, oh, I'm painting a house or something. And the guy whose house it was, he turned out to be a train driver.
The next concern was what to do with the money when we had it. Now, Bruce and I were in favour of a stow, somewhere to lay low until the heat had died down.
Well, the plan was, first of all, to find a place that was easy access for what we wanted for our transport and that. And obviously a place out of the way, as quiet as possible.
And it just so happened that there was a large farmhouse for sale 27 miles away from the bridge in a village called Brill. Well, for a deposit of £500, we had ourselves a safe house.
I mean, I've heard people say, well, I funded it. It was funded between us. It was just, we bought a lorry at an auction, there was one vehicle stolen, they had £500 for the farm.
On August the 6th, the Ulsterman advised postponing the job till the following night. Something to do with the Wakes Week holiday up north, but what it did mean is that we were guaranteed a bumper crop. I went straight to Leatherslade Farm to tell the boys. Bruce and I mulled it over a bottle of Jameson's, but there was nothing really to say. We'd had so many conversations, everyone knew exactly where they were and what they were to do. The only thing to do now was get the job done.
Well, I wasn't unaware of the consequences here, you know? And going up against the Queen and stealing the Royal Mail. I mean, in the old days, you used to top them straight away. It's like, I suppose you could say, we were modern Dick Turpin sort of thing.
Waiting is always the hardest part, but that 24 hours really put us on edge. Finally, midnight dragged itself in, and it was time to get ready and get going.
Deadly silent, deadly silent. It was a summer's evening as that, but it was, well, it was just nearly breaking dawn. I was wearing a balaclava, a pair of jeans and a jumper likely. But I was laying down on an embankment waiting for this thing to come along, you know. When Bruce was further up the line somewhere, what happens is the same starts slowing down, and stops. We stopped at the bridge when Buster was trying to mount the train. But when they're on an embankment with no platform down here, there's a few steps to climb up. Mills, in his own way, was a hero, as I see him. He was a bit of a hero, you know. And he fought Buster off the thing. Buster couldn't get up. Buster couldn't get up at all. And I went down the other side to the other side of the thing and pulled Mills away from where he was kicking Buster down. And I think it was Jimmy Hussey. I think it was him, because it was all covered with balaclavas and you couldn't really tell who was who. And I pulled him back like that and gave him to the person behind me. Right now, I don't know if it's who I think it was I gave it to him, but and I can't say who really hit him. He was a bit cocky. I was a bit cocky when I said, move the thing. He said, no. He said, I've got to wait till I've got air pressure. He couldn't move it. I said, start the fucking thing or you get some stick. And then Charlie knocked the windows in and Charlie got inside and Buster attacked the door with an axe, and then Buster went in and I went in. When Charlie put the windows in, the people inside would be frightened, you know, and you'd be frightened, and I would be frightened. We're not talking here now about trained soldiers, we're talking about post office sorters, you know. I was prepared to be demonstrative sort of thing, you know. If you've got a weapon in your hand and you're going to subdue someone, then you've got to growl at them. I think it was Buster hit there's a cage in there with all the thing, and Buster took the padlock off and I went in and I opened up one bag and I pulled out one bundle of notes and I said, this is it, okay. Well, I was elated, and then we just started throwing there was a chain, one to the other, which you could actually, if you wanted to, get them, throw them down and land on the floor beside the thing. But it was all done correctly. You know? The sacks, I'll tell you what, the sacks weighed something. But so you're talking about quite a lump of dough. I mean, I was tired afterwards. I was really tired afterwards. When I got back to the farm, Bruce said he went to bed. I was sitting at a window all night, all right through the day, right into the daylight. I sat at a window because someone had to mind the farm, you know, and I was very aware of the position we were in. Here we are sitting out in the arsehole of nowhere, and everybody's looking for you. But I tell you something, you see them bags, 120 bags there. It was a sight to see, you know, and I can remember it now. And this old hat, but it was something that nobody's ever seen before. Well, I had commitments. I had to pay the Irishman money, and Buster came with me. The Irishman got out of the van, and they had a false bottom in the van, and they just took their money, put it into the bottom of the van, and they took off. Well, I admired the guy because everything he said, it was right, you know. The Irishman, when I found out who he really was, then he didn't want anybody else to know. So I said, all right, we'll just keep it between Buster and I. And we kept it between Buster and I for all these years, up until I met you. Buster and I were loyal to him, you know? And there was no need for him to be nicked. Why drop another body? And there's another couple of guys on it. They never got nicked as well. And I hope they've enjoyed every day of their freedom.
Tell me about the Ulsterman and how you found out who he was.
I was in Kensington Gardens with Buster, and we had a meet with the Irishman. We were sitting in the grass, and he went to get some ice cream.
Who went to?
The Irishman, you know. And we had our coats off, and his coat was lying on the floor. And his glasses case was just there in his inside pocket. And I looked, and I see what name it had in there.
And what was the name?
The name was McKenna, Patrick McKenna.
An Irishman, but there's no name, nobody had met him apart from Gordon and Buster.
That's
so
right.
nobody knew what he looked like, and Gordon deliberately kept him away from the rest of the train gang.
No evidence, and so not proved. Nothing further in the file. I think that what is true is that there was somebody else who was investigated, who was...
But that doesn't help us get any closer to him.
No.
What we know is that nobody else knows about him, which makes it, in a sense, harder for us. So where do we go from here?
Well, I mean, I agree with you completely. And in one way, one of the reasons for doing this couple of days of research on this was actually in the hope that he had been one of the people that had come under suspicion. Because if he had done so, you can see from these how much detail is given about the person, their dates of birth, where they come from, who they are, who they're married to, what cars they drive. Had he been one of these who had come under suspicion but somehow fallen under the radar, I'd have had him by now.
I left my home because the Daily Mail said that the police believe it could have something to do with the airport robbers. So I know that puts me in the frame. And so I thought, well, I'll take off.
Hit the road, Jack. Don't you come back no more, no more, no more, no more. Hit the road, Jack. And don't you come back no more.
I have been an affair with a girl up in Leicester. So I phoned her up. I said, I fancy coming up to see you, you know. So she said, oh yeah, come up, certainly.
Oh woman, oh, treat me so mean.
I've made arrangements to meet this person in the Grand Hotel. On that particular day, in one of the Leicester Echo or whatever it's called, there was a photograph of Bruce, Jimmy White, and Charlie. And Bruce wore thick horn-rimmed glasses at the time, same as I used to at the same time. They're fashionable at that time. And I walked in there, and the bird behind the counter, she thought that I was Bruce Reynolds, would you believe? And so anyway, we spent some time in the cocktail bar downstairs, and then later on we went back upstairs, and she left, and she left, the door come in, and there they were. Tommy Butler and Peter Vibart, the terrible twins. They know who I am, I know who they are. And they said, right, get yourself ready, you're going home.
Well, don't you come back no more. What you said? Don't you come back no more. I didn't understand you. Don't you come back no more. You can't mean that. Don't you come back no more. Now, baby, please. Don't you come back no more. What you trying to do to me?
Once the ball started rolling and the way things, I mean, there was mistakes made.
The main thrust of the prosecution's case was that the mail bags found at the farm proved that the farm was used as the hideout, which meant that the fingerprints found at the farm must belong to the people who robbed the train. Now, it's been said that the prints were planted, which they might have been, because they were only found on movable objects. But the fact still remains, the farm, the jeeps, the print, the mail bags should have all been burned to the ground.
If they'd have just put about 10 gallons of petrol in there, it would have been gone. And it was so simple. But nobody wanted to be there when it happened. The evidence against me was nil. There was no evidence against me, none whatsoever. But there was my background, I'll come back to it, and as I say, it's the most foolish thing I've ever done in my life. But the incident in the courtroom with the prosecuting counsel, that is how I got caught. Just that. There's nothing else. There's no other evidence against me at all. That's what got me caught. That's what put me in the position where I wound up, my mouth. Payback time.
The gist of the evidence was that the yellow paint found on the sole of my suede shoe matched the yellow paint that had been used to paint the lorry at the farm to disguise its identity. Yellow paint had also been found on the pedal of the Jeep. Khaki paint, also found on my sole, was said to match the other Jeep. Now, I never drove any of the vehicles. And if there was yellow paint found on the sole of my shoe and on the pedals of the Jeep, why was there none found on the floor matting of the Jeep, as photographic evidence proved there wasn't? I wasn't even wearing suede shoes on the day of the robbery. If I had been, they'd have been destroyed immediately. I'm a professional criminal. It's standard operating procedure for all items of clothing to be destroyed immediately after you've done a piece of work. Why would I, after stealing 150 grand, hang on to a cheap pair of suede shoes that linked me directly to the robbery? And I had plenty of time to dispose of them. I might be a thief, but I'm not stupid.
They had to explain how the paint could be on the pedals, but not on the carpet.
Now let's be clear. I'm not trying to maintain I was an innocent man fitted up. I was a guilty man fitted up, doing his utmost to get unfitted up. Questioning police integrity could have put me in an awkward position, and it was a dilemma with which I wrestled. If I was to pursue that line of defence, that left the door open for the jury being read the list of my previous convictions. But if I didn't, how would I explain the paint?
I had to attack the police to make my point, and then they can read out my criminal convictions. They can't do that until the moment I say it's wrong that the paint, please put that on. So you understand me? So then they read out my list of convictions, which there are a few, you know, and consequently the jury is listening to all this. They know that I've just been chucked for the airport. I've done this robbery and this jewellers, and I've done that and this, that and the other. So they see me as that kind of sees me as what I am, you know? And they thought, even the police said, well, you got away with it before, but this time, you know, it's stop time. I had a similar friend of mine, and he was doing time, and he was doing a big one, and it was for an armoured car. And I think that they were doing 15s for it. I was walking on the exercise with Bobby, and we were talking about it, and so I said, well, what kind of bird can we get? So Bobby said, well, he said, they got 15s. Bobby knew them as well as I did. He said, they got 15s for that. He said, we've got to get a 20 at least, you know? And that was what I was sort of looking in that direction of a 20-year sentence. But instead of that, the judge fooled me. And he gave us 30.
Biggs's escape was very dramatic, but then he was never very good at keeping a low profile. Over a few drinks with any expat he met, he'd freely admit his own identity.
I don't feel sorry at all for Biggs, no. No way, no. He's not on my visiting list.
After being locked up in Wandsworth Prison in 1964, Biggs escaped 1 year later, going on the run around the world until he finally settled in Brazil in 1970.
This is a man who was on the run. OK, good enough, he got out the nick. I think it was more the help of the others than him. I don't think he's got that amount of brains to do all that. He wasn't a train robber. He was there. He happened to be there with the train driver, whatever his name was. Biggs wasn't a train robber. But he done things that he shouldn't have done. And one of them being, he wrote a book. And he put in the book that I was the one who struck the driver. Complete and utter bollocks. And he was nowhere near the train. He was up the line, and he had the audacity to say that about me, and he wasn't even there. If I went in front of the parole board, and the parole board's reading the book that he put that I hit the driver, he wasn't thinking about me. I'm not going to get my parole. You know, so fuck him. That's what I say, you know.
How was the island trip in terms of finding the Ulster?
When we went to Ireland, we had two people that interested us, two men of the right name who had joined the service in Ireland. And at that time, we felt that it was likely that he had joined the service in Ireland. So we went to Ireland to try to either find them or eliminate them from our inquiries. I was given two names, two initials and surnames. One of those initials was not Patrick. It was Peter. I was given dates of birth for these two men. I recognised that this man, P, with just the first initial P, that his first name was Peter, that he worked in the south of England, that he had joined the service as a boy of 14, and that he was really so old that he was even outside my very wide framework. So the second P. McKenna that we were given with a date of birth, his date of birth exactly fitted the sort of age range that we expected. And when I then looked to see who this man was, I discovered that his first name was Patrick. I realised that he'd been born in Belfast. And at that point, now realising that I had a Patrick McKenna of the right age, working at the right time, the only one that the post office employed at that time. And he's born in Belfast. At that stage, I started to think that perhaps we were on the home stretch.
Based on the name that you gave us, we started looking into the post office records. And in the post office records, which were very interesting, we found 8 people called Patrick McKenna who joined the post office in the right time, in the right area. Some of them were too old, some of them were too young. How old did you think? How old was?
I would say late 40s, early 50s.
And would you recognise him?
Well, but I recognise him again now. And I know they're 50 years on.
Although he lived a life in the north of England and brought up a family in the north of England, he got married in Islington in 1949. And when I looked at the address where he was living when he got married, it's about 12 minutes walk from Finsbury Park. And you'll remember that you told me that Finsbury Park was the first meeting place where Patrick McKenna met Gordon Goody.
We found a guy, he joined in Belfast, then he went to London, he lived in London, very close to where you first met him actually, to Finsbury Park. He then moved out of London to Manchester and rejoined the post office. And we've found him, and this is the Ulster.
Do we know anything about him now?
Is it him?
Do we know anything about it?
We do, yeah.
Yeah? Tell me about it.
We had a list. One of the jobs that we had done was we'd listed every date of birth of every man of that name born in Northern Ireland. So as soon as we had the date of birth that was given to me under the Freedom of Information Act, I was able to go to my original list and identify that this is the man, and immediately get purchased that birth certificate, which gave me his parents' names and allowed me also to see what siblings he had. I also spoke to his family and I understood a bit more about the life he had in Manchester. But I think, he obviously had been a very fond father and grandfather, and was a family man.
Not a criminal?
No, I don't think so. Or not somebody who was habitually a criminal.
He's not with us anymore.
Yeah.
He died in 1995.
Yeah.
He never lived in London. Oh, he didn't live in London when you met him.
Marylebone, I thought he came from.
He married somebody from Manchester.
I don't know anything about
it. And he lived in Manchester. He worked for the post office in Manchester. He became a post office inspector in Manchester. And it appears that that's where the information for the train came from Manchester.
Well, I've got to say, looking at these two photographs here.
But is that him?
It's just...
So we've got a guy who we think it could be, but nothing's pointing to him being a criminal or involved in any crime or anything like that. So what... The fact that he was involved in the train robbery might be... He might be wrong.
Well, if it's wrong, then the fundamental information about the name and those sort of the details that were gathered in the park all those years ago, they're wrong. If you're saying to me that this guy was so clever that he left something around with a false name in it and then created a myth about, yeah, maybe it's wrong. But if not, he is the only person that fits the profile that we have.
I presume that if we find out about him, he's got money. He lived quite a rich life.
I don't see any. I don't see any money in the family makeup. I mean, he didn't leave a will, for example. There's no conspicuous wealth anywhere that I can see. But he was very religious. And I was told that even when he was poorly, he would go to church every week. And it makes me wonder whether he may have given the money away.
Do you want me to tell you a bit more about him?
Tell me more.
He retired with ill health, a dodgy heart, in about 74, but lived for another 20 years after that. He was very religious. He was involved in the church quite a lot.
And he gave all his money to the church? Eh?
We don't know that. That would, theoretically, Gordon, that's what I think he did. I think he was involved very heavily with the Catholic charity. And my instinct, and it might be wrong, is that his money went to the church.
Yeah.
One of the things that struck me when I read about the train robbery and the sort of the ethos in the post office was that this was something waiting to happen. There was quite a lot of anger within the post office about the way in which staff on the trains were not being protected. They wouldn't pay for internal telephones so that people could phone each other. And I'm just wondering whether he was not somebody who felt that he'd teach someone a lesson.
Have you spoken to the family?
We have spoken to the family.
And what did they say?
We've not told the family yet that their dad was the Ulsterman.
Oh, that was a surprise to them. Yeah.
The question is, would Gordon recognise him after so many years? I mean, when you think about how mistaken people are in police lineups, in identity parades, a week later, let alone 50-something years later.
I mean, I've lived with the guy vaguely in my head for 50 years, and but you coming up now with this photograph and got over the surprise, if you like. As I say, I've got to give you 99. And that's... I would say 100%, but I would like to. I can also think of the family, that if they see their father in and as a church-going family man. And all of a sudden someone comes along and says, no, he's a trained person, you know. Then knock the life out of him, really. And so I'm saying 99% just to give them a little breather, you know, in as much as, well, he only thought he was my dad, sort of thing, you know.
But but it is 100%, isn't it?
Huh?
It is 100%.
Yeah, I think it is, yeah. Yeah.
You never thought you'd see him again, did you?
No way, no way. I think you've done some good work. Like me, you should have been a detective. Well, let's say that I've had a good life. I've had a good life, you know. I'm happy as I am at the moment, and I've got a good woman around me, and we've been together and we've been happy, and I suppose everything is, well, as good as it can be, I suppose, for everybody. It's sort of getting near the time when the shop's going to close down, you know. I'm 84 years of age now. I'm a great believer in live and let live, you know. But having said that, I'll steal your money.